All right. I'm coming here today to talk about what I think might be one of the most important, if not the most important aspect of electronic music creation, and that is drum processing. I personally am of the belief that the kick and the snare are the two most important elements in an electronic music track and should have a substantial amount of time put into getting them right, getting them sounding nice, fat, punchy, slappy, and then in turn, really nurturing the rest of your drums, your entire drum bus. I think that informs a lot of the decisions you will make down the line. One big thing for me is if the drums don't sound good, the rest of the track is just going to come limping up behind it, you know? I think if you put a lot of effort into your drums, specifically the kick and the snare, but the entire drum bus, I think that it will really take your music one tier up. Just dealing with your drums in a nice way is going to move you one tier up in quality of music. So I'm going to go over a little bit of my process, a little bit of my thinking, a little bit of things that I think would really help to boost any genre of electronic music, really boost it up and get it to that next level. So we'll listen to the drum loop. So what I've done is I've created a drum loop, but I have not really processed anything except for the snare, and we'll get to that shortly. We'll move down the line. I'm going to start with the kick, then we're going to move on to the snare, and then we'll move forward from there. One of the most important things I think is very important to take into account is that you should be able to remove all of the elements of your track except for the drums and the sub, and it should stand on its own. This, of course, is my own personal philosophy. This is not a hard set rule. There really are no rules. There's a lot of formulas and a lot of fundamentals, but no hard set rules. But I am of the belief that if you remove everything from your track except for the drums and the sub, that it should stand on its own. It should be groovy with just those two elements alone. So spend a lot of time. I always start with the drums. I always make sure to put extra effort into the drums. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So let's listen to it real quick, this little loop. It's probably going to be a little bit loud because I've done no processing. So I do have a limiter on my master channel here to keep it from reaching any of the plus decibel range. So it's just going to be limited, but it will be loud. You might want to turn down right now if it is a little bit too loud. But I've done no processing, and we'll just go ahead and listen to it one time through, and then we'll start with the processing. All right. Sounds good. So I'm going to start with the kick. Now, I went ahead and made a kick using a plugin called Kick 2. Highly recommend. I'll drop a link down here in the description. Definitely recommend checking it out. So I just built a kick. And then what I've done is I've taken... Shish. Let's actually duplicate this channel. So I have taken a kick that I made in Kick 2, which sounds like this. Just a thumpy little boy. And then I've added a click sound on top of it, just to give it... Now, inside of Kick 2, there's the ability to add clicks and noises and all that stuff. It has sub oscillator for creating the kick, the body of the kick, and then it has 3 samplers which you can add clicks to. When I got done making the kick, I realized that it needed a little bit more transient punch to it, so I just cut a piece of another sound, and then as you can see, I did a little fade here. The end result is this. So this is what I'm going to do to start with. First of all, I'm going to bring this down. I'm going to bring it down to -6. The reason I do that is in 32-bit float, which Ableton 10 and higher, by default, when you bring a sample in, it converts it to a 32-bit sample. Clipping technically does not occur. You can reach like a plus value in your decibels, right here on the metering. You can reach a plus value, but it is not going to technically clip. By clipping, I mean it's not going to shave the top of the signal. Generally, when you reach 0 dB, if you go above that, it will, you see how my hand is doing right here? And then if I were to bring my hand back down, it would be as if it were chopped off. That's clipping. Clipping does not occur in Ableton 10 or higher. It converts everything to 32-bit float, and then you can just literally turn it down, and it will not be clipping. So, but when you run it through processing, the processing could clip it. And I want to make sure that I'm in control. We are going to end up clipping this kick, but I want to make sure that I have control over the amount of clip. If I have it at 0 dB, and then I put an EQ on it, and then like a compressor or a saturator with a soft clipper on it, it's going to clip it at wherever it's at. I want to bring it down so that I can push it back in and then clip it incrementally, if that makes sense. So the first thing I'm going to do is come in here. I'm going to bring it to -6, Control F, super fucking secret. I guess it's not a secret, but it's definitely that high quality tech. Control F for the search function. Gonna put an EQ on it. These are the things that I'm gonna do. First, I want to boost the sub down here. I want to add just a little bit to it, just to give it like a little bit more weight. Then I'm probably going to boost some of these mids here to give it like some smackiness, some of these low mids. Probably not that much. You know, I go aggressive and then I tone it back. I'm going to probably shelf out some of these highs. And the reason that I'm going to shelf out the highs is because when I go to process it through a compressor, it's going to really exaggerate a lot of those highs. So I want to make sure that I tone them down so that when I process it later, it doesn't become just like super clicky like a psytrance kick or, you know, a hard style kick or something like that. That's just really aggressive and snappy. And then I might cut a little bit out of these low mids and lows to just accentuate the sub. Somewhere right in this range. You listen without. You listen without. With. Without. With. Control F. Compressor. Glue compressor. This is something that I want to keep in mind now. Look at this transient right here. This is the transient portion. This is 10 milliseconds. This much of the track is 10 milliseconds. If I highlight here, and then if you look down at the bottom, directly underneath the EQ8, right around band 4, if you look directly underneath where band 4 is, you will see that it says duration 10. That's 10 milliseconds. That's how much of this is going to, I'm going to increase this to 10 milliseconds. So what's going to occur is, since I've increased the attack, none of the highlighted area is going to be affected by the compressor. It's not going to start compressing until it reaches here. Now, the reason that's important, Control F, let me do this. Let me whip out the Smexoscope. I will leave a link to this in the description as well. It is a free plugin, and it's essentially an oscilloscope. I don't know if that's the exact term for it. An oscilloscope is more of like a printout of the wave. This is kind of like, it just shows you the waveform in its entirety as it plays. I want to bring the attack up to about 10, anywhere from 10 to 30, because I want to get that initial transient through the glue compressor. I want to bring the release down super low. We will alter the release as we start to compress. I want to bring the ratio down to 2 because I don't want to compress it too much. Really what I want to do is get it shaved off. I'll show you what I mean. This is what the kick looks like. Let's zoom in a little bit. That's not the zoom in function. Where is the zoom in? There we go. Now you can see it a little more. As I bring this threshold down, look at what's happening. The transient, you see with the threshold all the way up, the transient is not the loudest portion of the sound. It's this portion right here. The initial the subby portion of it. By lowering the threshold, now what I'm doing is I'm really accentuating. Now I'm exaggerating. I'm probably not going to compress it this much, but I'm just exaggerating it to demonstrate that now the loudest portion is the transient. Okay, so, and you'll notice it sounds clickier. That's really what we're going for. So I'm going to bring the threshold down until I really like the kick, the clickiness of it, where I'm getting like a nice good smacky. Probably about right here. Then I'm going to use the makeup gain here to shove it into the soft clipper here. And as I bring it back up, you will notice that it's much poppier. And you also notice it's just bricked. I'm all about bricking shit. I want to brick everything. I just want to brick it out. You'll see. And then as you see, remember what I was saying earlier about the reason I'm shelving these highs, which I might shelve them a little bit more, is if I don't shelve them, you see how clicky it's gotten? Let's do this. Control G, -13. You see how it's much clickier? That's why I want to shelve these. Ungroup. I might even... See, without the EQ, very click, very much click. With the EQ, very much punch. So, if you go too hard into the makeup gain, it'll start to distort. It's going to really squarify the wave, which is totally fine if that's the sound you're going for, but that's not the sound I'm going for. I'll demonstrate real quick. You see, it's like... So I don't want to hit it that much. Somewhere in this range where it's just giving it like some thump. It just sounds a lot thumpier to me. And it's squarified a good deal. Now I'm going to turn the Smexoscope off. I'm going to Control T. Rename. Oh, I want to recolor it. And then I am going to print one of these kicks down. Whoa, Control Z. I got to arm to record. Remember to arm to record. Oh, remember to set your routing properly. Boom. So now if you look, it's squarified here. You see how I've clipped? This is clipping. It's clipping the top of the signal. I'm getting it very squared. Now that I've printed that down, I'm going to want to go to here, I'm going to clip it a little bit off. It's already been rolled off, but I just do a double roll off just to make sure, just to be doubly sure. It's probably a little bit neurotic, but hey, it's what I'm doing. Now that I've printed this kick, I like to use my kick and snare. I like to use MIDI. I like to use audio for everything else, and I will demonstrate why right now. Don't forget to Control-J consolidate, because if you don't consolidate, it will not apply that fade when you drop it into the sampler. So I'm going to take it into the sampler. I'm going to drop it here. I'm going to go ahead and paint this track this color, which indicates that I am no longer using it. I'm turning it off. I'm going to delete this channel because I just needed that channel to print the kick down. And now I've already written my kick in MIDI here. The reason that I process a kick, this is important to take into account. I like to process my kick and my snare. I like to have one sample that I use because I want sometimes the compressor won't release. If you're doing like a snare roll or a kick roll or something, that compressor won't release before it's time to trigger again. So you're going to get it smushed. So what I like to do is do the processing, print down one instance of the kick, and use that so I get that heavily compressed sound without having to worry about the release time on the kick. So I've printed down one kick. I put it here into my sampler. I've come through already ahead of time. I have it at -6, which I like to be, of course, like I said, with 32-bit float, you don't really have to worry about clipping, so you can just turn it down. You know, you can put a utility on the master channel and turn it down. Some of the diehards will say not to do it. I personally don't mind putting a utility on the... I probably won't mess with the master fader, but I will put a utility on the master channel and turn it down if need be. I want to turn the filter off. I want to make sure that the amplitude envelope looks away. Here's the thing that's important, is to make sure that you're turning off any velocity. Velocity determines volume. Bring that down to 0 so that no matter what the velocity is, it will trigger the same volume every time. Again, volume -6. I want to come back to the sample, and then I want to listen through. I'll solo it just to see if it's sounding the way that I expect it to sound. Yes. Okay, so that does. I like my kicks to be very short. I don't worry about tuning my kicks. Some people are very concerned about tuning their kicks. I think kicks are so transient in nature that you can't determine if they're in tune or not. I'm doing a lot of my tuning in the sub range, 808 sounds, just big sub sustains. That's where I'm going to be doing my tuning. Kicks, just run it how it is. Okay. So over here, I have this little run. Normally, I will turn the scale down to 0, but because I want to do some octave manipulation, I want the scale to be at 100. Yes, okay, that sounds good to me. Okay, good. I have my kick done. This is the reason I like to use a sampler. I'm going to Control-G group. I'm going to create a chain, Control-F, external instrument. I'm going to toss it on here. I'm going to send this information to the side chain to ShaperBox 1. I use ShaperBox on my side chain group. I will turn this to 1/16. I will turn this one to 1/8. I like to use a volume shaper instead of a compressor to do my side chaining because you just get much more control. In order to send MIDI signal to the sidechain compressor, you're going to need to use external instrument, send it. I have 2 shaper boxes here, so make sure you send it to the correct one. The first one is the kick, the second one is the snare. Now, if I go into my sidechain here, boom, boom, you will see right here, it's very short. Let's increase the length just so you can see it. You see right here in this top corner, you can witness it doing its thing. So, sang. Sorry that you had to be part of that. I'm sorry that you experienced that. It was not my intention. Anyway, back to business. Kick done. boom. Snare takes a lot of time. I did a lot of my pre-snare work beforehand so that I didn't have to spend an hour fiddling. This tutorial is about processing specifically, not about generation. What I have here is a snare maker. This is literally one instance of operator. Let's go over my decisions for EQing. I don't want to go over creating snares because there's a lot of good resources out there. Os or AU5, he has a snare tutorial, a snare creation tutorial. That's amazing. I'll link to that. Mr. Bill has one. It might be on his YouTube channel. It might be on his Hardcore Ableton website. If I can find it on YouTube, I'll link to that down here. He also uses operator. He uses several instances of operator as opposed to one single instance so that you have greater control over the pitch envelope. You have greater control over the filter drive and the shaper. And then Kill the Noise has one, and I think it's actually might be a Facebook video. I'll link to that. Facebook. But I'll link to it anyway so that you can see. And his is about snare generation within Serum. So I've just created a little snare here. Let's listen to it without any processing on it. Whoops. Let's go here. Let's turn on my automation. As you can see, I have some gain automation. You can watch it occur right here on the EQ8. I really like to accentuate the fundamental frequency of the snare because it gives it heft. I feel like kicks and snares should be heavy. They should have weight to them. So I do this EQ automation you see here, starting at +3 decibels down to 0. I've cut out all of this unnecessary low end, which is going to be re-added because of the soft clipper here on the glue compressor. I increase the fundamental frequency here, very wide boost, so I get some before and after. Let's turn off this band. It just gives it more of a thoom, thoom, thoom. I've got a little bit of the boost right here. Let's turn 4 way up so you can hear it. It's just also an area to give it weight. Some of that range. Let's Control Z. I've added this band right around here. Anywhere from like 2,000 up to like 5,000, even down into the 1,000 range. This is going to make it really snappy. You'll listen. We'll Control Z to get that down. And then 7 here, it looks like I've done literally nothing. So I'm going to turn that off. I've done -0.12. That is not a real amount. I just probably was doing something before and decided to undo it. So I'm just going to turn this shelf off. So again, with the EQ, without the EQ, just some thump, some snap. Into the glue compressor, again, like I said, you want to make sure that that transient gets through. The release time on the snare is very important because the release time on the snare will affect the tail. On the kick, it's so transient, it almost doesn't matter. I keep it very, very quick release. But let's listen here. If I turn it way up, it just gives it gives you greater control over the tail. Again, ratio at 2 because I don't want to compress it super hard. I just kind of want to. On this one, I used the range. I slammed it into the threshold really hard and then pulled back on the range so that it's slapping the compressor really hard, but then it's not compressing the signal quite a bit. And then I've shoved it in through the makeup gain here. Let's do this. Whoops, not Control F. We'll do Control G. Again, we will do a -10 here. I think that it gives it much more weight. The glue compressor shove it in there really hard. Also, it doesn't appear that I have this. I'm glad I did this. It doesn't appear that I have this on all of the... I guess I don't need it because, again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to print it, which I have here. I'm going to print it down. I'm going to consolidate it, and I'm going to toss it into the snare MIDI, do the same thing I did with the kick. So, let's do that now. Boom. I got one instance of that snare. Control A. We'll do this. We'll do the same thing we did earlier. We will turn this gray, which indicates that I am no longer using it. We will close it. We will take the snare audio here. Again, I'm going to Control J to consolidate it. I'm going to drop it into here. I'm going to turn the filter off. I'm going to make sure it's at -6, make sure that there's no velocity. I think I'll leave the scale the same too, in case I want to do like a, you know? Now that I'm done there, let's just, whoops, let's do this. We'll take this, we'll drop it down here. We'll repaint it. Let's just make sure it sounds the way that I want it. The way that I expect it to sound. This isn't my favorite snare in the world. I was just trying to throw one together for the purposes of demonstrating how, like, the purposes of demonstrating what the processing chain is like. I'm going to delete the snare audio. Again, I'm going to Control G group this. I'm going to create a chain. I'm going to add an external instrument to it. I'm going to send it to my side chain. Shaper box, make sure to send it to the second one. We're going to go down to my sidechain channel and just verify that it's triggering. Yes, it is. You can see it triggering right there. Something to keep in mind with sidechaining, I like to have my kick sidechain very short, my sidechain, my snare sidechain a little bit longer. Kicks are shorter, snares are longer, sidechain shorter here, sidechain longer there. That's my philosophy on that. Again, there's no rules. Do whatever the fuck you want. So, I like to layer my snare. I have layered, ooh, it looks like I've done some processing here too. I think I got a little overzealous with the snare. One of the things that I heard Ilgate say is, don't add a bunch of highs to your snare. Either pick a snare sample that has already some very nice sounding highs, or add a layer that has highs and boost those highs. You know, I don't necessarily think that I don't agree with that 100% of the time, but in this instance, I decided to go that route, you know, get myself out of my comfort zone and go ahead and try something new. I've added this nice wide snap. I like my snares and my kick to be very center. I like the supplemental portions of them to be very wide. So I've added this clap here. Boost the shit out of the highs. I'm probably going to roll it off a little bit here to make room for the transient of the snare. Let's see how much. Yeah, let's go ahead and we'll roll it off till about there. This will make sure that the snare transient gets through and it's not competing with this clap. Snares are divas, all right? I'm a snare. You don't want them to have to compete with other things for transient presence because they will not be happy and they'll be like, fine, I'm just not going to snap. I'm just not going to snap right now. So, roll it off. Again, I've cut out some of this unnecessary lows. I've rolled it off gently. I've boosted the highs, Control F, compressor, and then I'm just going to compress the shit out of it. I like to clip almost everything. As you'll see as the tutorial progresses, if you are reducing dynamic range, you can increase overall loudness and increase overall like punch and snap. So again, with this one, I might go a little bit higher on the compressor, a little bit higher on the attack range. I'm going to come lower here. Again, ratio down around 2 because I'm not trying to super compress it. Really what I'm trying to do is, just get it to tickle the compressor a little bit. I want to slam it through the soft clipper is what I want to do. So as you can see, it's already clipping. This is what I was talking about earlier when I said that I want to reduce the volume, or reduce the gain rather, of my kick sample, so that when I run it through the processor, I can determine how much I want it to clip. This now is clipping this amount no matter what. If I were to print this out right now, I could only, I could use the threshold to bring it down, but I'd rather start. Generally speaking, I want things to happen earlier in the chain. As I'm moving through the chain, I want the problems to be addressed earlier in the chain rather than later. So pulling the threshold down to reduce the clipping is not as ideal as reducing the gain in the first place. So, a little bit quick release, a little bit long attack. If you listen, let's really exaggerate it so that you can hear what the attack's doing. You see here, it's smushing it like almost immediately. As soon as the threshold is reached, it's clamping down. As we increase it, you see you're letting a lot more of it through. I don't want all of it through, but I want some of it through. I really want this part through. Again, I don't want that much threshold. It was just used as a way to demonstrate. I'm going to come down here. That's a little too much, because it's kind of getting, the information is getting lost now. But I do want to clip it pretty substantially. Right about here. Sounds pretty good. Now this is what I'm going to do. Zoom back out. Control D, duplicate. Control D, Control D, Control D, duplicate. Now let's listen to it in conjunction with the snare. Now that's way too loud, as you will notice pretty much immediately, if that is something that you are used to listening for. A lot of music making is just like knowing what to listen for. This is too loud. I want the clap to be supplemental. I don't want it to be the star of the show. Again, snares are divas. They don't want to have to compete. So we will bring it down. Let's go way down. I want more. Maybe more. Maybe I'll just reduce it by as much as I made it up. There we go. Sounds good. Okay, on to the next one. This is just for texture. I've got a little bit of a lead in, and then I've got a little bit of, like, if you listen to it, it's just like a texture. It's just like a crumply, very wide, crumply thing. This one, Control F, EQ, we are going to boost the highs with that as well. There's a lot of this stuff. If we turn off this low pass, or the high pass rather, you'll notice that there's a lot of this low information that just is unnecessary. I will EQ and compress literally everything. EQ, compress are two effects that I put on literally every element of my music. EQ, compress. I want to make sure that I get rid of unwanted sounds, and I want to make sure that I'm controlling the dynamic range. I will do EQ and compress on literally everything. So let's step a little bit forward. I really just want some of the highs. You'll notice that there's a little peak way up here, but I'm not noticing it with my ears. I'm probably not going to tame it a lot, unless once I start shelving these highs and boosting them up, then it starts to get really piercing. It's way up here. It's like right on the verge of being in piercing range, and it's like right on the other end of being like inaudible. which is why it's not bothering me so much. But I want to roll this off because I don't need any of this back here. And then I'm going to really crank on these highs. Let's go ahead and really accentuate. See? I'm not even noticing that it's offensive at all, so I'm probably going to leave it. Just deal with things if they're problems. Don't deal with things as a matter of like habit or, it's good to have certain habits and it's good to have certain formulas and procedures and routines, but like that shouldn't be the case when it comes to like dealing with issues like this. I noticed that it was spiking, but it didn't sound offensive to my ears, so I'm not going to really bother with it. I want to crank on these highs because this rain beefer, as it's called, and this clap are really where I want to add back a lot of these highs that I had initially added to the snare. So, Control F, compress. With this one, I'm going to bring the attack way down, and I'm going to kind of keep the release a little bit longer. Again, I'm going to do a ratio of 2 because I'm not trying to like create any transient or like create any snap or pop. I just want to control the dynamic range and maybe tickle the soft compressor to just brick it out so that I have more control. It's already kind of hitting the clipper because I've amplified the highs so much. One rule that I like to keep in mind, I guess I shouldn't call it a rule. Again, I said no rules. There's no fucking rules, bro. It's the wasteland out here. No rules. Anyway, a thing that I like to keep in mind when I'm compressing is putting back as much as you took out. And that's what I'm going to do here. So as you see, we're hitting right around -3, -4. I'm going to add back -3, -4. This actually, if you listen very carefully, it's very subtle but very important. The glue compressor has accentuated some of the highs. Listen very closely. It's accentuated some of the highs. It's very subtle. It's extremely subtle. In the grand scheme of the entire mix, it's probably not going to matter much, but it is important to it's important to take into account. Glue compressor is going to glue it together. I've boosted these highs, so when I come to glue it together, it's going to accentuate those highs. Again, let's listen to it in conjunction with the snare. This is way too loud, so I'm going to come and bring it down. Snare group, guess what? Oops, I'm going to put a compressor on here. I'm going to turn it off. Control F, EQ. I am going to do some processing on the snare group. Let's go ahead and collapse things as we finish with them so I know about where I'm at. Snare group. You see how much you see that thump right there? Turn it on, do some of this, do some of this. So if you notice, because I have the release very fast, if you listen without, it just kind of slump, pap, and then it hits and kind of dies off. With the glue compressor on, because I have the release set to a very quick time, it's going to accentuate a lot of that tail. Listen. So I can increase the release time to deaccentuate, unaccentuize something. De-accentificate the tail. That's what I'm doing here. It's still quite present. Now that I've shoved it into this glue compressor, there's a couple things I notice. I kind of want this. And I'm going to come through and I'm going to put a little bit more highs in here. There we go. That's the sweet spot right here. Ooh, that sounds nice. It's a really good snare. Okay. I think everything is about where I want it to be. Control F. Valhalla vintage verb. Toss it in here. And then we're going to make Control G. Control R wet. Control R dry. Very important when doing any sort of like delay or reverb processing is that 100%, the more you add to the mix, the more you're reducing the center of the signal. It's turning the center down and turning the reverb up. So what I want to do is actually create a chain here where I have my Valhalla vintage verb at 100% wet, and then I have a 100% dry signal, and that way I can adjust how much of the reverb I want using this right here and not sacrificing the center using the mix knob. You see? So now I have it 100% wet, but not sacrificing any of my main signal. So this is what I want to do. Here's what I want to do. I want to probably bring this down to 10. I want this to kind of be dark. People use a lot of plates. I might use dirty plate. With my snare, I want the reverb to be very short. I don't want the bass multiplier. Actually, I might want it around 1,000. Let's try it out. I'm getting saucy with it. This is essentially just like wherever I'm at here, boost it by this much. I want the high shelf to be up. I want the cut to be up. I want this to be around 120, somewhere in there. So this is what I'm doing. I kind of want it to be dark and I want it to be very short. I'm going to have the decay time extra long right now so that I can just hear the character. But then once I'm done, I'm probably going to reduce it by quite a bit. I want to bring the shape down. I want the attack maybe a little bit high. This is going to give it more washed out. Since I have the dry signal, I don't mind if it's a little bit washed out. I want it darker. So I'm going to use the high shelf to make it darker. See if we listen to it here. It's more... I might come back with it. Yeah, I want it to be nice and dark. Bring the size down. As you bring the early reflections down, you'll notice that kind of gets like a rum, rum. I don't want that. I'll bring the late down. That's nice and dark. Now I'm going to bring the... I might add back some mids. I'm going to come in here around here. Add some of those mids. Yeah. There we go. Nice dark drum room. Bring the wet down. Very subtle, but very important. Here's the thing that I think a lot of people don't take into account. The difference between something sounding professional and amateur is the things that you don't even notice that are there. Everybody knows how to cook a chicken breast, But like, who wants to eat just a plain ass boiled chicken breast, right? I mean, it'll give you the calories you need and it's high in protein and low in fat, but like, it's bland. Put some fucking smoked paprika, a little bit of fucking onion powder, some garlic powder. That's the secret. That's what's the difference between like Gordon Ramsay and some schlub. Anyway. Very subtle, yet present. Again, without, with. And the thing with the reverbs and delays, there are things that you want to really take into, you want to really be leveling them out in the context of the entire mix. It is nice to do it soloed, just to get a feel for what it's going to sound like. But I'm not going to finalize how much of the reverb I want until I am entirely done with the mix. I'll do this as well. We'll do a 0 there. I think we're done with the snare group. Let's listen one more time. Probably bring it down a little bit. We'll listen to it with... Whoops, no. Maybe a little bit longer. Okay, I like the way that sounds. On to the shaker. The rest, listen, kick and snare are the two most time-consuming elements. Everything else is going to be a cakewalk because all I really want to do is do some light EQ, some light compression, make sure that everything is dynamically consistent. Then we will go here and do some bus processing. Shaker loop, number 1. Control F, EQ. I like to use in my drums a lot of very natural sounding stuff. I want them to be electronic but organic. A little bit imperfect, a little bit humanized. I used to be really like, everything has to be quantized exactly and blah, blah, blah. I like the kick and the snare to be quantized exactly on beat. Everything else, I kind of want it to be a little bit loose. It gives it that groove. It gives it that real human. You're like, oh, a person made this. Oh, I can listen to this because a person made it. So, really gentle EQ and compression from here on out. It's going to be a cakewalk. Again, I want to just remove a lot of these unwanted frequencies. See this? That's just like the sound of the room that they recorded it in. I don't want any of that. You hear it's just like, oh. It is unnecessary to the character of the sound, in my opinion. You might want that. Again, no rules. I don't want it. Raise the highs. I'm telling you, boost those highs. I get a lot of stuff. I do like mixing and mastering for clients. And especially when I get like, I was doing this compilation for one of my homies' labels. I was doing the mastering for this compilation on Swamp Step. And Swamp Step is like a 140, like deep dub. Not exclusively deep dub, but very much primarily a deep dub 140 label. And these deep dub guys, man, they'll low pass their shit. They'll shelf it way low. Like, the highs want to be there. Put them highs up in this motherfucker. I want that shit to be bright. I don't want it to be overwhelmingly bright, but here's the thing. Here's the thing. Let me do this. I do want to talk about this real quick, because it's something that you might not consider. The audio spectrum is logarithmic, not linear. There are exponentially more bands in the higher frequency range than there are in the lower frequency range. So there are a lot more places for your highs to fit into the mix. When you start down here with the sub, you've got like room for one sub element. You know what I mean? I want one sub element. In my low mids and my lows and my mids, I can have a little bit more things, but I might want only 2 or 3 elements because then they're going to be competing. As you move up the frequency spectrum, there's a lot more places for a lot more stuff to fit. So cranking your highs is not going to contribute to as much of a messy mix as like adding a bunch of mid frequency stuff. That's a thing that I think is important to keep in mind when you're making your mix. So when I come through, I'm cranking highs on a lot of stuff. People ask me all the time, they're like, how do you get bright mixes? I'm like, I fucking push the highs. There's a lot of place for a lot of highs to fit. Push those highs. Don't get it into like the screechy or the offensive, you know, like the sharp territory, but like a very washed out sound like this, I can push the highs and it'll sound great. Whoops, let's solo this real quick. There we go. And it adds a little bit of texture. It adds a little bit of texture, some stuff that you probably won't notice, but will contribute greatly to the quality of your mix. We're good there. Oop, let's compress it. Control F. Compressor. Now here's the thing I want to keep in mind. I kind of want to increase the attack time a little bit to let that snap through. So I'm letting the snap through, but now that I'm increasing the makeup gain, I'm also bringing a lot of that other stuff up to meet the snap. You see? It's just bringing up a little bit of that other stuff to meet the snap, reducing dynamic range. We will go onto here. Let's drop a compressor. We'll turn it off. Control F. We will find an EQ and we'll drop it in here. Let's listen to this. Boop. I like that. Again, I'm probably going to reduce some of that. And I'm probably going to push. Push some of that. There doesn't appear to be a lot of highs in here. It's just very much like. So I don't think it's necessary. But I do like to boost somewhere in this range to give it more, to just accentuate that. Now this one is also a... I'm going to crank this one because this one also is very transient. Most of my transient stuff, I like to really crank on them to give it that like to just accentuate the transient, you know? I like it to be snappy and poppy. This is probably quite aggressive, but guess what? I don't care. What do we say? No rules. I added this fade on here because if you listen, there's a little bit of like... So I just removed that so that I can just have the bit that I want, you know? Just the... That sound? The pluck. We'll bring it down a little bit. I don't know how much it's going to need to go down. I'm going to process everything, and then I'm going to listen to everything in context and do my adjustments as needed. Onto the shaker. This one doesn't need a lot of EQing. I'm going to put a cautionary EQ just in case. It looks like everything is really where I would probably put it. Again, go a little bit high. I don't think I'm going to go as aggressive as I did with the plock. Here's the thing I like to do just because it makes my life a little bit easier. I have brought the threshold down to where it is doing 5 decibels of attenuation right here. And then I'm just going to add 5 decibels of makeup gain right back to it. So this just makes it more washy, which I kind of want. Texture, atmosphere, those are the things that are going to really help. One time I was like, why does my track sound empty? It has everything in it. It has a sub, it has drums, it has a bass, it has lead sounds, it has, it was missing texture, it was missing atmosphere. So what I would do when I was in my younger music making career, I would add more stuff and then it would just get too busy. What I was missing was just texture, atmosphere. So as I use this glue compressor to bring up some of that part of the shaker, it is adding texture to the track and it's going to fill it out. Boom. Clock number 2. Ooh. Guess what I'm going to do? Have you guessed? I'm going to fucking cram it into the glue compressor. I kind of like some of that. See, if I bring it up too much, I kind of like some of that because it kind of gives it some weight. Kind of like a washiness here that I'm probably going to try to take out. There we go. I don't need a lot of this because I'm getting a lot of it from here. Like a lot of this washiness. I did add washiness to here because washiness in this shaker is part of the character of the sound. The washiness in this snap is not part of the sound. It's not part of the main characteristic of the sound. So I'm going to cut a lot of it out. And then I don't really need to concern myself with reducing too much atmosphere. Because again, we have there. So that is my reasoning behind that. Now we're going to, since I added a fade, doom, doom, doom. I'm going to add a little bit there. I'm going to collapse it. Into this hat choke, I made this using addictive drums, and it's just like a EQ. There we go. Control F, compressor. Don't need to crank a lot of those highs because this is already a very bright sound. Not as much attack. Let's go a little bit less because I don't want to accentuate any of the choke or anything. It is making it a little bit sharper. You can hear when the stick hits the hi-hat, you can hear a little bit more of this right here. Just makes it a little bit sharper, but not in like an offensive way. Bring it down a little bit, probably. Boom, onto this one. Control F, EQ, 8. This one has some ultra highs here. I'm probably going to pull back on those a little bit. Again, just a cautionary EQ. That should be good. I think that's good. Boom, the ride. Here's the thing about rides and the thing about like metal sounding stuff in general is that it's largely made up of like a handful of harmonics, right? The sound might look like this. Bing! If you hear like a chain link fence or like, you know, hitting a keg with a baseball bat, it's going to be like a handful of harmonics, and you don't really want to go through and like poke at those harmonics because you're just altering the fundamental sound. So this ride, whoops, let's solo it. Yeah, you see, there is a little bit of washiness to it, and that's probably contributed by the room it was recorded in and the microphone it was recorded by. But you can see here, it's just like a handful of super sharp harmonics. And I don't really want to go through and like cut any of those harmonics. Your inclination, especially when you're dealing with like certain metal sounds, chain link, or, you know, jiggly metal, or like very like pure metal sounds, like something that's like unadulterated, just like a sample of a piece of metal, is that it'll have those main harmonics, but you don't necessarily want to affect those harmonics because you're going to be altering the fundamental sound. So I'm coming here. I also don't want to boost them because they will get very sharp. Listen. It's very sharp. So, but I do kind of want to bring out some of that because I like highs. Sue me. Sue me. Literally sue me. You can't. I'm doing what I want. I'm over here doing what I want. I might not want to accentuate the stick hitting the cymbal on this one. We'll come down, but I'm probably going to want a little bit of the long release. A little bit longer release so that I'm also not accentuating the tail. Okay. That's really it. Now this is what we're going to do. We're going to go through and open up all of these again. We're going to listen through one time real quick and just determine what's too loud and what's too quiet. Whoops. Okay. I think that sounds pretty good. Currently, this is one thing that I think is important, especially when you're trying to determine like your gain staging, how loud and how quiet things should be. If you do that quietly, it will really, really accentuate issues that you are having, especially in the highs. If you turn your audio interface way, way down, I'm not going to do that here. What I'm going to do is Control F, put a utility on the master channel, because if I turn my audio interface down, it's still going to be recording at the same volume, and I'm going to be the only one who can tell. So I'm going to put a utility on here, and then I'm going to do some mixing while it's quiet. People talk about it all the time. They say mix quiet. It will really, really accentuate if there are discrepancies in volume that need to be addressed. Let's go quieter. Here's the thing too. I want my kick and the snare to be the most loud of all of the elements in the mix. See, did you notice immediately how much louder that ride was than the rest of the track? It was almost immediately I was like aware that it was too loud. There we go. I think that's a pretty good balance. I'm going to turn this utility off. Boom. I think that we're done with that. Let's listen to it one more time real quick before moving on to the next stage. We will boom, reduce. Good. Now we are going on to bus processing. I like to clip my drum bus. A lot of times the loudness that you need out of an element is louder than the mix requires. Does that make sense? I might want my snare to be this big, but then it's going to, you know what I mean? It's going to spike like this. And then in the mastering phase, if I want to do mastering compression, mastering multiband compression, master limiting, it's going to, all of those spikes, all of those peaks are going to be triggering my compressors, my limiters and whatnot. So, but if I come in and I turn them down, then all of a sudden now they're too quiet for the mix. So I like to put a clipper, because especially the kick and the snare, like I said, two most important elements in my personal opinion. And I want to make sure that they fucking hit hard. You know, I want them to be loud and I want them to be present, but I don't want them to be louder than the mix, you know? So by using clipping, especially with compression, the goal here is that you want to increase the perceived loudness, but reduce the actual loudness. Like, it'll sound louder, but it will physically be quieter, because brains are dumb and they're easy to fool. So anyway, I have been, my homie Matt Oof, super dope guy, and my other homie Joey Diesel, they've both been putting me onto the IK Multimedia T-Rack series. And T-Rack has a classic clipper, and that shit sounds nice. I will add a link, boom, below in the description. I have just created here one knob that literally is linked to the gain and the output. I keep the slope hard. You know I keep that slope hard. And then this is just as I go up, it's going down by the same amount. Let's open the Smexoscope, because I think that it is important. A lot of people will be like, oh, you know, you got to do it with your ears. But like, doing it with your eyes as well will let you know what to listen to and pay attention to when you do it with your ears. Smexoscope is a good resource for this. As you notice, I come up with the clipper. This obviously is too much. I'm just trying to get aggressive. Where you can see that it's just literally bricking the sound. When you get this much, it's like hella squarifying it, and you can hear it like distort. If you're going for that like Suicide Boys or type of sound or something, definitely, if you want that distorted ass 808, this is a good thing to do. But with this, I just want to cut the tops off. You can actually see. Now look, without. With, I have not altered the perceived loudness because I'm reducing the output as much as I'm increasing the gain. But I have made it actually physically quieter. And I've just trimmed the top right off. Now, again, Smexoscope is free. Gonna put a link down in the description. T-Rack series, not free. Classic Clipper, not free. But if you buy like a bundle, it usually comes with it. Free Clip is an alternative to the T-Rack, the Classic Clipper, and it is free. Hence the name Free Clip. You can do the same thing. I have the threshold. This is the ceiling. It has a little, this is doing what Smexoscope is doing down here at the bottom, but it's small, so I use it in conjunction with Smexoscope so that you can see. I like to keep the clip type as hard because as you roll it off, you'll get a gentler clip, but then at the risk of like reducing some of the transient punch. Same with the oversampling. See, let's look. Watch how hard I'm going to brick it. If I turn the oversampling up, it will kind of cut back on the bricking of it. But that's what I want. I want that shit to be a square. You know what I mean? I want that shit to be bricked the fuck out. That's my taste. That's the flavor that I'm into. We'll turn this back on. So now I've processed the kick. I've processed the snare. I've gone through. I've got everything balanced. I've got everything compressed. I've come back behind with the T-Rack Classic Clipper just to make sure it's dynamically consistent. Let's again, one more time, listen to it all the way through. And then I think that's going to be a wrap. Once again, I'm going to leave all relevant links down in the description. This is my first YouTube video. I've been meaning to do this for a long time and I just haven't. So now I'm fucking doing it. If you guys want to like, share, subscribe, tell your people. I hate doing this part because it feels disingenuous, but like, that's just the nature of the game. You know what I mean? So tell your fucking people about your motherfucking boy, please. And thank you. Boom. Thank you. Y'all be safe out there.